Most commodity farms in the Midwest don't even have gardens. Most commodity farmers in Nebraska and Iowa don't even grow their own vegetables or produce their own eggs. Like, whereas 100 years ago they did.
Yeah.
So the farm's been compartmentalized. That's put the farmer into a position of vulnerability where now the state has agency over everything.
This episode of Unpacking the Problem is brought to you by Garden Optimizer. The beta is about to be released. Here's the Discord invite. Garden Optimizer is unlike any gardening app on the market. If you are new to gardening, a homesteader, or a seasonal market grower, this app is going to save you time and increase profits with just a touch of a button. Your garden plan will take into consideration temperatures, marketability, and so many other parameters I don't have time to list. And if you can't keep up or you just don't feel like gardening on a particular day, no problem. Garden Optimizer will reroute your plan instantly from that day, just like your driving app reroutes when you miss a turn. It's not just an app, but a breakthrough. I have a radical idea. Check this out. 2 sets of grandparents. We use my wife's. Mother's side, large garden, but not quite a plantation. Father's side crosses the threshold, it's considered plantation. This is a Soviet Union, so all plantations are considered owned by the state. So they exile the family to Siberia to live all the days of their lives. So observation, farming is very dangerous and a tyranny. Not though because tyrants take away or attempt to take away God-given rights and benefits, but because tyrants are so stupid, they try to take away God's punishments. Just kind of toying with it. With that, here's Curtis Stone.
Yeah, I have a brother.
Okay.
We grew up in Kelowna, BC, Canada, and our parents split when we were early, which kind of traumatized us in some ways, which, you know, kind of ends up shaping your personality later on, you know, as you find out. But yeah, my background, I mean, I have been I got this bass behind me. I've been a performing and recording musician since I was 12 years old. I was gigging, playing in punk bands and things like that on the west coast of Canada. We used to go down and play gigs in Seattle and Spokane in the early days. Back in the days when you could just cross the border with a piece of ID and
Yeah, I remember that.
no real story, you know. Remember those days?
Oh yeah.
Pre 9/11. And yeah, I thought I was going to be I really wanted to be a touring, you know, performing musician. That was my early ambition as a youngster. And that carried on until I was about 26, 27. I kept the music thing going until I was 28. I moved to the big city in Canada, Montreal. Has a fantastic jazz scene. Yeah, I was mostly into punk rock music and stuff like that in the early days, but I really got into contemporary jazz music and fusion and contemporary classical music. Tried to build a career in my later years in Montreal. I was doing gigs. I was playing, you know, I mostly a composer, producer, arranger, would write charts and things like that, lead bands. But I kind of found that there was a niche in playing bass. And so I started playing upright bass and I started getting paid to do gigs. And I was like, wow, this is actually how you make money as a musician, is you just do gigs. So I started gigging a lot in Montreal. And then I don't know, I kind of got burnt out on it, to be honest. I kind of committed it's at least 20 years of my life to just being a musician and only doing that. Montreal, I was partying a lot in those days and doing drugs and stuff, and just it wasn't a healthy lifestyle. But I also became pretty interested in geopolitics. And I had been for a long time, because when I was into punk rock music back in the days, you know, I was listening to the Dead Kennedys and artists like that were talking about President Reagan and a lot of the geopolitical issues of the United States back then. And was listening and reading books from Noam Chomsky and things like that. So I had this sort of geopolitical edge to myself. And the lead up to 2008 with the big election that was supposed to bring hope to America, um, I got really kind of woken up to libertarian ideas, if you will, in a way. I kind of grew up as a leftist, as a lot of
Hmm.
people that were punk rock and
Yeah,
whatnot did. But punk rock and leftism back then was anti-establishment.
that's
Now it's
right. That's right.
Exactly. And the punk
now it's
rocks are
pro-establishment,
for,
right?
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. They're
So
posers.
exactly.
Mhm.
So I kind of actually stayed the same when the whole scene kind of changed. Because even back then in the late 90s and early 2000s, leftists were making fun of political correctness. Like it was a joke to make fun of. Yeah, I remember even Bill Maher, who still does, but it was kind of leftist to make fun of political correctness and be anti-establishment and make fun of stupid things. And so I was there. Um, but then I got really obsessed with sort of doomsday stuff kind of in the mid 2000s. And then I was in the early days of YouTube and Google Video, I was just getting red pilled like crazy. And I was going down these rabbit holes. Still a musician. I left Montreal in 2008, but probably the 2 or 3 years leading up to 2008, I really became obsessed with the Mayan calendar prophecy. And at that point, I knew I wanted to get out of the city. It was around 2008, I witnessed a freezing rainstorm in Montreal, which really opened my eyes to the fragility of centralized systems. You guys in Florida wouldn't, know anything about these, but up in New York, you get them, and in Montreal, we get these like warm fronts of rain that come in when it's minus 30 Celsius, and it rains and it freezes on contact to everything. So it covers everything, including the wires for the telephone poles and electric utilities in ice, and it makes things fall apart. The city was pandemonium for 3 days. People couldn't drive. People couldn't walk on the sidewalks. My door was frozen shut. Couldn't Took me like hours to get out of my apartment. Um, it was crazy. And I went to the grocery store this one day, and I saw there was very little food items because the trucks couldn't come in. And that's when I really viscerally realized, holy shit, man, this city is a disaster.
Wouldn't
In
take much to take it out.
It wouldn't take much at all.
Yeah. Now,
Um,
John and I are from Ohio. We're used to those freezing rains. We've seen them.
okay,
You know,
yeah,
they did wipe things out. That's why he moved south and I moved
Toledo,
south too.
Ohio.
Yeah. So we're
yeah.
right there, just south
We
of
we got out
Canada.
of that area.
And you know
Like,
what? I'm
join
actually,
the union or die.
yeah,
Like,
right, right.
bye.
Well,
I go,
the thing that it's true, and I experienced how fragile the city is, especially in a cold climate. But it's more of an attribute to the city than it is a cold climate. I actually find now, I'm 45 years old now, and I've been doing this stuff for almost 20 years. Um, is that in a shit hits the fan scenario, I actually prefer a cold climate in the sense that if the proverbial shit hits the fan and the food trucks stop moving and people are starving, I would far rather be in a cold climate because it's not the government I'm concerned about in an SHTF scenario. It's the starving masses. And so I'm now in a situation where I live on a mountaintop. I've got a beautiful property, 40 acres, tons of forests, tons of personal space. I have no visible neighbors, complete privacy. We produce a good amount of our own food. We're getting better every year. We're completely off grid with our own electricity. Um, I have my own independent water sources. I have three independent water sources. And I'm almost finished my house, and we have another house that we live in right now, but I've got multiple greenhouses. So now I'm in the situation where I really like the cold climate because I'm not when the New World Order is going to pull the switch on whatever they're going to do, and maybe they're just pulling switches all the time now. I like where I am and not near starving masses who are uneducated and stupid. And I have a very low opinion of the average Canadian and American, if you will. I call them the average Walmart shopper. Basically, that's my opinion of the average constituency of North America. And so I'd rather be far out of the way of the average Walmart shopper when things get tight and just kind of sit back and
And
let
truly
it
living
go
off
down.
the grid's got to be awesome. Like
It's
here, I
amazing.
mean, people try to do it in Texas, the free state of Texas. You can't. You have to uh, connect to the grid and pay a tax for the grid, even if
What do you mean
you're
you have to?
You have people in Austin have tried it. Ex-military vets to live off the grid totally, but they live within the metropolitan area.
Well, that's the problem.
Yeah, that's
That's
exactly.
the problem.
There's
I
a
guess you
direct
got to go
correlation.
super remote until
But
where there's no
not even that
infrastructure.
remote. It's possible in Texas. I mean, I'm very familiar with the geography of Texas. I do a lot of consulting down there. I will tell you that, in my opinion, there's the direct correlation between the amount of concrete in an area and the amount of freedom or tyranny that you experience.
You mean like an inverse relationship there?
There's an inverse relationship. So more concrete equals less freedom, less concrete equals more freedom. So if you want freedom, forget metropolitan areas, period. You need to be in areas where there's dirt roads and there's less utility, because simply when it comes to the amount of concrete, you're talking highways, interstates, buildings, government infrastructure that has government employees that manage it. And it's really that simple, is that
I
if you
believe
want to
that
be off
for
grid, you
sure.
got to be out of it.
Yeah, I do business in rural Arkansas, and you could totally do what you're doing down there.
Rural Arkansas is where it's at. In fact, northwestern
Duck
Arkansas
Heart.
is where it's at.
Yeah.
Yes. Out of the Mississippi River, you don't want to be near the Mississippi, nowhere near Memphis. You want to be up in that northwestern quadrant. You know, it's probably a quarter of the state where it's green, mountainous, higher elevation. That's where you want to be in Arkansas.
Where would you? I live in Arizona, Mesa, and it's concrete jungle, right? So, but there's some northern Arizona stuff, but it's so expensive.
It is. You know what? I actually, I this is what I do a lot of the time, is I basically help people find freedom either in their geography or a homestead or even navigating the law. And I actually don't really like Arizona in general. I have a number of clients that are continuously looking for places in Arizona, but it's hard because with the water, you know, it's really difficult. There's just not a lot of green there. There are pockets where you can find little green spots, little oases in Arizona, but they're very expensive. Whereas you could just get it out of the state. You know, the problem is, I find a lot of truthers or people who would consider themselves preppers in the US really get obsessed about the politics of a state. And I think for the most part, the politics of a state are only present in the metropolitan areas, as we just discussed with, say, like a place like Texas. Austin is liberal. So just get out of the Austin area, right? Yeah, Arizona's great because it's, well, no, they lost that election. It was a swing state, but it is still mostly conservative. But if you're in Phoenix, Mesa, you know, Scottsdale area, it's a metropolitan zoo. Whether the politics of it, the federal politics of it are right or left don't really matter. It comes down to the municipal politics. And the municipal politics are the things that affect you the most. And so just get away from those things. So you can live in a leftist state, like you can live in Washington State, just live in northeastern Washington State where it's all country boys.
100%. And like New Mexico, super left. But if you go to Taos, there's this dude building Earthships.
Yeah, Michael
aware
Reynolds.
of him. Yeah. And he goes to third world countries and builds them as a part of a outreach donation type thing.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I got into Michael Reynolds stuff 20 years ago. It was like the first thing that I really got into. I would highly recommend not living in New Mexico, because
it's
the climate,
super left right now.
But it's not even that. It's just geography. Look at a map of North America. Where is it green and where is it brown? The brown places generally will not survive very well in a grid down, full on SHTF scenario. And I'm not saying that that's going to happen, but my whole philosophy is prepare for the worst, hope for the best. And so I prefer the green areas. And that's why so many Americans live in the
where you can, at least you can plant, there's hunting, like
absolutely.
Even fishing in Arizona is like, unless they stock
there's nothing in Arizona. Without government infrastructure, nobody could live in Arizona. I mean, the Hoover Dam provides, like, when you fly over, you know, you go over Grand Canyon and you look down and you see Nevada and all these dry, dead, desolate areas. Nothing naturally grows there. But then you see the Hoover Dam and it's like, whoa, what is this feat of human ingenuity? It's quite fantastic. However, without that infrastructure, nobody's living there. Like, it's dead. The natives, they all were nomadic. They moved through there. And humans don't naturally want to stay there without huge infrastructure. So I
And
say
then
get
what's
out.
scary with the whole infrastructure in the metropolitan areas, especially in the states, they're all tied to computers, satellites. And if I heard theoretically, if like China or an adversary takes on a satellite, we're done. The banking's done, and it's going to take
Oh
a
yeah.
year to come back.
Well,
A
this is
year.
For
Curtis's
sure.
expertise. This is what he's focused on more than anything in the past few years.
That's why I
Yeah,
wanted
that's
to
where
get.
I'm at
I wanted
now.
you to
Mhm.
substantiate my concern.
I was, no, we were at a debate a couple. It wasn't really a debate. It's just that I had not heard of certain things, and so John was kind of telling me about this. But go ahead. The satellites. Our electrical grid is tied to the satellites.
That's what I'm asking
Well,
Curtis.
it's all connected. Problem
Hmm.
is, for the Americans, is that you guys are going to be told it's China or Russia, but it's actually just going to be the U.S.
Right, right, right.
It's just going to be the New World Order, the Anglo-American establishment throttling you because they
Well,
don't
I don't know.
like.
I don't know who they're telling this to because no one here believes it. Everyone knows where the corruption is. We don't believe that we haven't believed Russia or China has been our enemy for 20, 30 years. So I
I
don't know who
know
they're telling this to. There's a couple baby
And now they're
boomers who
like,
leftists.
just watch, NBC and that, and they
Exactly.
believe it, but they don't have any
Yeah.
impact on society at this point. So
I think
yeah,
you're
they
right. And I think that's why they want to throttle America more than ever.
yes,
Because
yes.
fundamentally, I mean, when I get out, and I've been to 45 US states, I've been all over the continent. When I get out there and talk to Americans, except the average Walmart shopper, but individuals, everybody seems to get it. The problem is nobody really seems to take it all that seriously because when it comes down to what they're doing in their day-to-day life to prepare, crickets.
All right, I want your assessment then on the steps that I have taken. All right? Okay.
Okay.
All right.
you're going to be dead in
John will
3
take care
months.
of the consultant fee for me. All right. Okay, so I and my friend, we've been talking about this for 20, 30 years. It's Wallace, John, a mutual friend up in Ohio. He says if shit hits the fan, he's going to Canada or northern Michigan. I said I'm going south. And so we had very different things, largely because I don't get along with the cold very well. But I said I would rather go south where there's continuous green and I can grow throughout the year and lots of water, as opposed to some place that's under ice for half the year. But you have a different philosophy on this. But I'll tell you, and you already gave yours, so let me give it mine. So I have a woods at 50 acres behind my house for hunting. They just tore it down, but they're still animals bear. Or they took out the pine
Yep.
trees and sold them. But I have two major rivers coming out of here that end up in the ocean. So there's fish and everything everywhere. We got animals just walking through our yard. Doesn't take much
Yep.
to hunt. I got an acre property. I don't have batteries for my solar panels, but we got the well generator and full garden. And really important, this I learned from you, is good social equity. So I kind of, all my neighbors,
That's
as soon as I
key.
came, start taking vegetables, dropping it off on their fences and everything.
Yes.
And they didn't know me from nothing. So they love me even though, they give nothing back and I don't care because there's one day neighbors got two pigs there and if I need meat, I know where to go. And I got a guy down the street. He wants to trade eggs for my cucumbers because everyone has a hard time growing them here. But everyone has chickens, so I'm like, well, I'm not gonna
Yep.
grow chicken. I'm not gonna take care of chickens. That's one other thing I got to do. So I kind of like have found my balance in here. Lots of friends who are police. Actually, every other family, if you drive down certain neighborhoods, every single other house has a police car there. We have more policemen than we do criminals here, and pretty much a wildlife. I mean, surrounded by 70% forest. I mean, our county is 70%
Yes.
forest. I don't see any other place, I mean, where I could see. Now, the only thing would suck is if this happens in the summer, it's hot. But the Seminoles lived here and grew year round. They didn't migrate out of town, head north or anything. So they survived the heat
Yep.
because there's so much water.
Yes.
The streams are 68 degrees year round. They're spring fed. So
Yes.
would you say this is a really ideal place to survive something like that? No population here whatsoever.
Well, yes and no.
Mhm.
Yes, context is everything.
Yeah.
I think there's ways to succeed everywhere. And I would say, as far as you're concerned with what you're doing exactly what you should. And I would advise anybody in that area to do the same thing. The social equity is key.
Hmm.
The problem is, and there's problems where I am too, but just to be devil's advocate for you, the problem is you're not seeing the population that's around you. So if you, but that doesn't mean they're not there. So if you go and look, just go into type into Google, I'd be happy to share an image with you if you like, but type in North American population density map. You're going to see a map where everything east of the Mississippi is where pretty much 80% of the North American population exists, hands down.
That's right.
So
That's right.
yes, you don't see that population around you, but I guarantee you 50 miles out from where you are, there's millions of people. So that means that during tough times, people migrate. And what will also happen in the United States, in my opinion, is that if there were to be an event that really disrupted the centralized systems that deliver food, water, and energy to people, people will naturally migrate south because it's an instinctive assumption that there's going to be more life where it's warmer, and that's a good assumption because it's true. So your biggest variable is dealing with other people. So yes, it's good that you have ironclad relationships with your immediate neighbors, but it does mean that in a complete collapse scenario, you're going to be dealing with violence more than I will. And that might be okay because you guys are more prepared for that down in the United States. All your neighbors probably have guns, as
Oh
I'm
yeah.
sure you do. So
Every single
maybe that's
person. It's
fine.
funny. Hmm.
For myself, I have young children. I don't want to see any violence. So I would rather just
Right.
be completely out of the way and just call the term the zombie apocalypse, though it's not really what we're looking at. But just when you imagine, a real shit hits the fan scenario, we are talking about a zombie apocalypse in the sense that think about the average Walmart shopper in a town like Atlanta, Georgia, right? You're talking about people that are fat, lazy, stupid, uneducated, have zero life skills, have zero survival skills. So when you factor in a tough scenario, those people will result to violence within like the first day. Whereas in where I live, very Christian, and very family orientated, it would take weeks to result to violence. And so that's just my preference. Just I'd rather just be out of the way. And I have good relations with my neighbors too. I just have way less of them. So it's just a different strategy. But I also have to deal with the harsh climate that for 4 months of the year it's really cold here.
Yeah.
So you have to be prepared to survive in a lot more inhospitable conditions than just say where you are, because in an SHTF scenario down in Florida or Georgia or any of those states, even South Carolina, it's going to be warmer so that you don't really have to panic day in, day out. Whereas for us, when we get down to, sub-zero temperatures in the evenings, making sure the fires are going and making sure the buildings are warm and the greenhouses are warm is a real deal. Whereas you might be dealing with people that are coming and migrating through, because you're going to see massive amounts of people migrating one way or the other in that type of scenario. So I would say there's upside and downside on both sides, and at the same time, people can be your greatest asset, but also your greatest liability. So you might actually benefit more from your network than I will because you have more neighbors around you. And so, it's kind of one thing of just like splitting it one way or the other and just factoring in all the variables. But the thing is with people is that people are a variable you can only count on for the people that you know. You cannot calculate the people you don't know. And so it's a wild card. And that's where I just chose, because I could have moved to the United States. I could have moved to Mexico or whatnot, but I would just prefer to be around less people.
And that makes sense. And
That
actually,
makes sense.
there's a lot of positives about the North. I do know. My wife grew up in Vilnius, Lithuania. Actually, not Vilnius, Biržai, Lithuania. It's on the very north of Lithuania. And so they're so far north. They have kind of the same weather as Michigan, but they're so far north that, like, it's dark at 3 o'clock in the winter. but they survived the Russians and the Germans were fighting World War II right through their backyards. So it was a
Oh yeah,
major cross, and all those families survived. I mean, obviously some were killed in the process, but their life went on when there wasn't a battle going on in their yard. I mean, they're farming, and nothing changed for them. They totally lived off the land, and they were used to
100%.
storing things through the winter. So if you have your scenario where you're up there in Canada and you're preparing for a couple years now, you found your system for stockpiling through the winter, storing potatoes and things like that, which they've been doing there for hundreds of years, so it didn't affect them.
Yes.
For
Well, and even
me,
what you're
yeah, go
yeah,
ahead.
what you're speaking to there is also a cultural context, which comes down to the eastern and western European Protestant work ethic, which is unfound in many places of the world. And this is where I always find it fascinating, where people think that by going down to Costa Rica or Nicaragua or Ecuador is going to be a solution for survival when there's no Protestant work ethic there. The Protestant work ethic stems from the fact that people had to prepare for 6 months, for 6 months of nothing.
Right.
So 6 months of abundance for 6 months of nothing. And in warmer climates, that doesn't exist. The majority of people where I live actually have a cultural understanding of the Protestant work ethic, which means that there's a high percentage of people, though we have a low population, there's a high percentage of people that understand that work ethic. That work ethic is absolutely necessary when it comes to surviving tough times, because the likelihood of me coming together with, say, the 5 people that live in my 1 square mile area, I'll most likely to be able to have all of them on board to say, we need to do this, you need to do this, you need to do this, so that we can get through the next 2 years, and they'll do it. Whereas in the parts where there's probably, in a square mile area of you, there's probably at least 10 times the amount of people that are in my area. That's more people to have more conversations with, that they might not have that cultural context. And so I would say cultural context is everything in tough times.
All right, so my
Question
neighbor,
about
just so
that.
you know, yeah, all right, yeah, go ahead,
Yeah.
Greg, please.
I was just going to say, it just occurs to me that the Protestant, you call it the Protestant work ethic, but like Eskimos are an example of a culture that had to prepare for tough times, and they weren't Protestants. So I
No,
don't
but
know.
they're mostly dead, unfortunately.
That's a good point.
Up in Canada, they're mostly dead. I'm talking about Western Europeans because if you've ever read Guns, Germs, and Steel by Jared Diamond, that's just who dominates the world. So yes, you're right about Eskimos, 100%. But in Canada, they're dead, or they're
Well,
alcoholics,
or
or they're
Russians. I mean,
confined.
Russians are Eastern Orthodox. They're not Protestants, and
Well,
yet
and fair enough.
Russians
I
have to
should have
prepare for the winter
widened.
too.
You're absolutely correct. And so it isn't just the Protestant work ethic. It's the Russian, Northern European would have been
Right.
more of a broader term I could have used that would have been more accurate.
Greg's the
That's what
Protestant
we're
in the
talking
group,
about.
by the way, too. So
Okay.
Yeah,
the irony in
Catholics
this is
here.
funny.
And like in Arizona, the doomsdayers typically, this is what they'll do. They'll have 30 years worth of ready-made food, especially the Mormons, and they're like, we're good.
Yeah.
But they have a network together. They're very together. But like you said, if you're in a urban area or within 50 miles of one, they're coming.
Yeah, but the
But a
problem
lot
with
of
that
them-
old school prepper thing, because where I'm at now is like I have that old school prepper in mind of like storing stuff and defense and whatnot, but I'm more got the agrarian side into it too. The problem with the old school prepper thing of like hunkering down in the desert is that, okay, you got 30 years of food, great, but everybody knows you have 30 years of food, and you have no way of renewing that food because your agricultural systems don't exist in those deserts. You got to have a replenishable
Yes.
thing as well.
Yes.
You can't just have stored food because the nutritional density of that food isn't all that great to begin with. You need
the
living,
sodium
fresh
content is
food, right?
ridiculous.
Yes.
It is. Of course, it's full of sodium. And so, because it has to be shelf stable for 30 years. So I would say a mix of both. I mean, when I think about being off the land and as resilient as you can. It's a 5-stage process. This is what I kind of advise my clients on is you start from a state of dependency, right? You come home, you turn the lights on, they work. You flush the toilet, you hope it flushes. But you have no agency over it whatsoever. Same for your food. You go to the grocery store, you hope it's there, right? That's dependency. You can get to a state of less dependency by simply having some stored food, maybe 7 days, a bug out bag, a bug in bag, whatever you want to call it, some self-defense, some extra water to get you through 3 days if the taps didn't turn on, a way to use the toilet in case the toilet didn't flush, things like that. You get to a state of less dependency fairly easily, minimal investment, maybe a couple $1,000. You can get to a state of security from there, where now you've got, maybe a month's worth of water stored. Maybe you got a small generator. Maybe you got a small garden now. Then you can get to a state of resilience, where now you've got a bigger garden. Maybe you've got a grid-tied power system and some batteries tied into that. Then you can get to a state of sovereignty or security next, where now it's dependence to less dependence to security to resilience, where now you've got more stuff going on. The system's getting bigger. There's more. You're getting towards sovereignty, to a point of sovereignty where you've got an independent source of everything, at least 2 of everything. So you've got at least 2 sources of water. You got at least 2 sources of power. You got multiple sources of food, incoming and stored, so on and so forth. And then you get to that point of sovereignty where it's just, you've got it all. And then that just improves from there. So that's where I'm at. I'm at a point of sovereignty where if the lights went out tomorrow, there was a big EMP, whatever it would be, we'd be able to muddle through, and I would be able to improve the systems over years. It's not perfect, but that's where we're getting. But so a lot of people who are preppers, they always just think about it. It's either 0 to 1. It's either one or the other. It's
Right.
not that simple. It's not, and it's more complicated and nuanced than that.
I have a question. You said 5. I'm only got 4. Can you
Sorry.
Can I see if I got the 5 down?
Dependency is number 1.
Dependency?
Less dependency, number 2.
Oh, less dependency. Okay.
Yeah.
I went for
Security, number
security,
3.
yeah.
Resilience, number 4. Sovereignty, number 5.
All
And
right,
I
very
apply
good.
that metric to
Mhm.
food, water, energy, and shelter. Even go further, talking about, education, community, social equity. Go through the 10 forms of capital and apply that to that. And even that comes down to your own personal health. People are dependent when it comes to their personal health, right? So you can really pull the lens back and get a sort of a macro perspective on how do you become as sovereign as humanly possible in every aspect that you exist.
Now, are you getting more clients within Canada because of the Trudeau phenomenon?
We worry about you as you worry about the United States. We're worrying about
What
you
the
up in
heck is
Canada.
going on up there?
We're
You know
really
what?
concerned.
That's all just smoke and mirrors. I mean, look
Okay,
at Biden.
tell us then.
It's the same
Oh, yeah.
thing.
We know
If
our
you-
concerns here, but we're not so
Yeah,
concerned.
yeah. If you look at if you're only looking at the politics,
Mhm.
you're missing the forest for the trees. Yeah, Trudeau's an idiot. Biden's an idiot. Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand. Dan Andrews in Australia. Emmanuel Macron in France. Whoever the new Muslim guy is they've got in the UK. The New World Order is essentially appointing dipshit politicians in every federal jurisdiction because the agenda is to dissolve the federal governments of all Western nations. This has been the agenda of the Anglo-American establishment for over 100 years, and now we're in the throes of it. So the politics in Canada are no different than the politics of the United States. The advantage that we have in Canada is there's just simply less government infrastructure. You might say, oh, well, Trudeau says this and this and this, but I understand the law. And a lot of my consulting actually is in the law, looking at specifics in the system. These stupid policies they put in mean nothing to me because Western law is all based on equity, common law, and Roman civil law. It's a three-part system. The United States is exactly the same. There's a maxim of equity that says first in time, first in line. It means that statutes and ordinances or bills or acts that were put in time preceding something else means that they stand. Perfect example of this is with Canada in the Emergencies Act during COVID. They said, we're going to pull the Emergencies Act, and therefore you have to bend over and take it in the bum. And you had no legal remedy. Fact was, we had legal remedy the whole time. And all of those things that were pulled out under the Emergencies Act were null and void because they were all subject to the Canadian Charter, meaning that something that was in time was first in line. The Emergencies Act had no jurisdiction. You got caught up with the cops, and I'd say, yeah, give me a ticket, add a few zeros. I don't care. When this goes to court, it's over because the charter stood. And what stands above the charter is the ICCPR, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, gives us remedy for a lot of all this bullshit that they're throwing at us. So I have zero concern of the latest bill or the latest piece of paper that some dipshit politician writes and says, oh, you need to bend over because I wrote this on a piece of paper. It's like, okay, buddy, throw it at me, add a few zeros, I'll see you in court.
Yeah, and the U.S. is a behemoth of a federal government. I mean,
Absolutely.
you have 9 different provinces, self-sustaining, supposedly. But yeah, down here, it's getting scary how overreaching.
But your remedies are the same for
giant.
us. The same for us.
Curtis, the
And-
only difference, what I'm worrying about Canada is not about Trudeau. I was just listening to his brother talk the other day, his half brother.
yeah.
Did you hear that? Yeah. So,
Oh, yeah. Well,
I'm not
I've
concerned
listened to
about
his brother.
Trudeau. I'm not concerned about the politics. There's a certain mentality in Canada that's very different than the United States. Your mentality and your way of researching is similar to what I see. What I like about American mentality is you're more paranoid than naive. And there's that's changing in Canada, but Canada has never had the need to be paranoid. You don't have the crime we have. You guys can leave your doors open. You can leave your car running when you go into the store. That was never the case here. So everyone's looking over their shoulders, and we're always looking over our shoulders for the government or the next thing. So for every Australia and New Zealand that's handed over their guns to their government, willfully, we're just watching, and our gun production doubles, and the people going into bunkers preparing doubles, and we watch this. And the biggest concern I have for Canada, and for you particularly, and I'm sure you're going to be fine, because I don't really typically worry, I just prepare. I worry because my wife's dad grew up in Siberia. Their family grew up in Siberia because they were farmers. That is the first thing they did. When farm size is a certain size, they freak out. They're automatic prisoners just because of the farm size, and so that, and they took it without even hesitation. So then you got my other side of my mom or my wife's family. Their farm was just under a certain acreage, and they stayed, and they're going to supply the local things. So that's my concern of Canada is.
But I don't understand what's different about that, Jeff, than in the US.
Because those are the things that have to take place on the ground. And my concern is that because of our weaknesses in America, our violent tendencies, it would never happen. It would never happen
They're
unless
already
there is.
taking farmland.
But they do it all over the US.
They're buying it.
I consult for
buying
farmers
it.
in almost every US state, and I see this shit all the time. It comes down to the municipal policies, just like John outlined at the beginning. We're talking about Austin, Texas. It comes down to individual jurisdictions. But I will say, as far as Canada is concerned, what Americans need to understand about Canada is that 80% of the Canadian population lives in Southern Ontario and Quebec.
Yes, that is true. I know that.
So when you're talking about Canada,
it's that mentality over
and
there
its
as well.
policies,
Yes.
it's where the concrete is. Earlier, I
Yes.
said there's a direct
Okay.
correlation between concrete and tyranny.
Mhm.
And so when you live in massive amounts of, and you go to Southern Ontario, drive up from basically Detroit into Windsor,
Yeah, that's where we used to live.
all the way to Montreal through Kingston, Ontario, the GTA, the Greater Toronto Area is concrete.
Yes.
That is where the Canadian population exists. The rest of Canada is wide open.
Yeah.
And then you find anomalies like Edmonton in Alberta to Calgary, where they're just flooding in massive amounts of East Indian immigrants. East Indian immigrants are actually quite resourceful. And yeah,
They're Sikhs, right?
they're Sikhs, yeah, mostly.
Very
And
benevolent.
Canadians, like to bitch about it here and there. But at the end of the day, they're coming in and creating value. They're running businesses. They basically have taken over all the franchises in Canada. So Subway, McDonald's, A&W, Quiznos, Tim Hortons. Those are literally all run by East Indians. So
Wow.
yes, it's kind of annoying that there's like, where do all the white teenagers work now? I don't even know
But
where they
there's a
work
value
anymore.
add.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, they're coming in and providing value. Unlike South American, Central American migrants that are coming up into the United States, they're just asking for a handout. And we can see the policies
Well,
that are
yeah,
They
showing
were
that.
invited by a handout.
They're invited by handout. Joe
Yes.
Biden said, "Hey, when I get elected, flood the
Yeah.
gates."
So
and even the inner cities are saying, wait a minute. So their strategy
they're crowding out the
of,
inner city. Yeah.
of
Yeah.
amnesty, and then we'll have forever one party voters. They're pissing off the loyalists,
And this is
they're
where
they're very, and I'm like, this is exactly why I mean, I'm a libertarian. There's corruption on both
the
sides.
problem is in the U.S. Too late. They're
It's
already
a
there.
one-party system. Yeah, we're a uniparty.
All the migrants are already there. So yeah, okay, sure. Now Chicago and New York City are going, whoa, 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 slow down. I know we said we want to be sanctuary cities and important everybody, but hold on. And then there was that whole Martha's Vineyard thing. Too late. They're already there. So when and the New World Order wants to destroy the U.S. first, because as soon as the U.S. goes, the rest of political, cultural norms in Western civilization go, because the U.S. is the symbol. Whether the Constitution has any force and effect in the United States anymore is irrelevant. It's the symbol, and it does, but the symbol of that bastion of freedom is the most important thing to freedom in the Western world. That's why they're flooding you with migrants. And the shots killed mostly people in conservative ridings in the U.S. That's why the massive assault on American freedom, because they want that to go first, because then when it goes, all hope goes. So I have a lot of hope for Americans, but at the same time, I'm not naive to go, well, look at the situation. I mean, people like to obsess about politics and Trudeau and all that, but to me, it's irrelevant because I understand the law. I'm completely comfortable challenging the law. I'm completely comfortable standing in a court pro se, writing paperwork and dealing with that. I'm in an extreme minority, even in the truth community, but I've done my homework. And so for me, I'm comfortable being here because I'm not intimidated by the latest bill that these idiots put in the House of Commons. It means nothing to me.
Greg, I'm sure you have a couple questions, and then I wanted to move on to something a little bit on tangent to this, what we were talking about earlier. Go ahead, Greg.
Well, I just wanted to introduce a possibility of a stage zero. And what I mean by that is you talk about stage one being the stage of dependency, and that would be like to get food, water, and our utilities, we're dependent on the stores, and on our utilities to provide for us. But our income we take care of. We're not dependent on anybody for that. But those who are also dependent on another source for their income, like welfare recipients and
No, that's a really
lot
good
of these
point.
migrants, they're stage zero.
Yes,
They're
that's
not
a
even
really
stage
good
one.
point, Greg. And I might add that to
is-
my next book, if you don't
Yeah,
mind.
and I also
Go-
wanted to introduce another thought. You mentioned that there are 4 people can be at different levels for different things. So food, water, energy, and shelter. I'd just like to introduce the possibility that there's a couple more places we could go. One would be infrastructure. So for example, your
Yes.
roads and your things like that. How sovereign are you on that? Are you dependent on the city for that as well? And can you work
That's
with
a
your
great-
community to develop your own infrastructure and be sovereign over
Yes.
that? And
That's a great
likewise,
point.
I mean, taking it a step further, you did talk about being sovereign over the law. So law and government sort of go together, I guess.
Yes.
But being sovereign in that sense, that's true statehood sovereign. I don't know what to call it, but legal sovereignty.
Yeah, yeah.
And then the last, and I think the one that's killing us is sovereignty over money.
Absolutely.
I think that is, we don't have that today because we're so dependent, obviously, on the Federal Reserve. But I believe it's possible to have sovereignty over money itself. And
I
that
believe
would
so
be,
too.
that would be so empowering if we could have communities, that
It
were
is,
able to
but-
trade and
trade for services.
and just say,
Well,
F you
yes.
to the whole rest of the world, and we don't need you.
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
true
And
sovereignty at
if
another.
if I were to drill deeper into all that stuff, I've covered a lot of the. I
I'm
love
sure
your
you
idea.
have. I
of
didn't
zone
mean that. I just
zero.
wanted to add those as categories.
Yes, but the thing is with money, is even preceding money. You need production.
Right.
So yeah, we can talk about money and what is that form of money. Great, those are good conversations, and I'm all in. I'm multifaceted when it comes to Bitcoin, metals, things like that. But you need, like, civilization as we know it is impossible without production, and usually that means having agriculture and things that bring people together have some kind of cohesiveness, because you can't have any level of specialization in civilization without the backbone of an agricultural system that looks after you, right? So yes, but this is where it comes down to agency over the things that you need. And that's where I start with food, water, and energy, shelter, because those are, bar none, you will not survive without those for very, very long. Energy, and in varying degrees of some, right? Probably water first, food second, shelter third, and energy fourth. But so where do you start in all of that? That's like the ultimate question. And that's where I say to people, if you don't have some kind of agency over the things that you need to live, or you have very close connections to the things that have agency over those, you're fucked, especially in tough times.
All right, so good.
I know you must be a clear
sorry.
thinker because you're a bass player. That's all.
All three of us, all four of us are musicians, so no. So all right, so then going from security then to production, we're talking about you need to have some production to have security. I guess I kind of like to go, I think everyone needs to make steps to go for, especially out of sub-zero into dependency at the very least, and get out of into less dependent. But I'd like to, maybe we can outline some steps for people. I think I'm already there, so I can ask questions on building the garden and getting the land and getting a property that has, growable land. So where would people start? I mean, you've started many gardens around the world. I mean, rough, if you could estimate how many you've done for other people, how many? What's the numbers?
I mean, how many? I've consulted. I've now been a consultant on homesteads and gardens and farms for 10 years. So
Yeah,
I mean,
just number,
I
line
don't
them
even
up.
know. I mean, it's got to be thousands at this point.
All right, nice.
I mean, for gardens and farms that I've directly been involved with,
Mm-hmm.
it's probably at least hundreds that I've seen in different climates, different countries of the world.
And then indirectly, you affected my garden, so that you got that number too, who you've never met.
Well, yeah,
but
the
actually
indirect
from
is
your
where we
videos,
get into the hundreds of thousands,
well,
probably.
millions, maybe even hundreds of thousands, definitely hundreds
maybe
of thousands.
millions. Yeah, maybe
A million, maybe. Yeah.
People using my techniques are all over the world.
So how
Because
did you
it's not
change?
even just
Yeah. So really quick, how did you change the techniques going from market gardener to homesteading? Because I think that's kind of where I think the important thing is. I have shifted.
It is.
I've shifted from I was doing farmers markets. I'm like, no, it's for our family, my community, and occasionally some sales. But the gardening is different. I mean, I'm all about wood chips now. There's so many different things I'm doing. So can you,
Me too.
for the homesteader garden, where do you start? Step one.
Well, number one is understanding what your needs are. That's step one. Is what do you need? What do you like to eat? What's growable in your area? Getting a picture of your context, I call it the holistic context. So the things that are your personal needs, your family needs, and then what's available to you, and sort of what's the steps towards the path of least resistance. That's number one. Then number two, it's kind of coming up with a plan of what's possible within that framework and then going from there. A lot of people try to do everything at once. That's a mistake. Start with easy wins, but also weakest links. So what are the weakest links? Address those things first, and that's going to be different for everybody. But address those first. So like for example, in a cold climate, your weakest link is the cold climate. So you need to have a greenhouse. If you're gonna homestead in a cold climate, you need at least one greenhouse. I would say the best way to address that for most is start with one simple high tunnel, and you can upgrade these as you go. But start with like whatever you got space for. Ideally, something like a 16 by 30 at least.
What's the cost in that, really quick?
A couple $1,000.
Got it.
And the more DIY you go, the less you can get. But I'm not a big fan of like PVC greenhouses. So I like to use steel.
First storm will knock it down.
Exactly.
PVC, yeah.
So steel, galvanized tubing. You can start with one simple high tunnel that dual purposes as a nursery. So you could like cordon off a quarter of it and then just heat that area. And then the other areas heat unheated, but it gives you that season extension of a couple zones warmer. That's a good place to start. Like I'm going to have, I'm 3 greenhouses on my homestead right now. I've got one greenhouse that's connected to my office that I'm in here. My garage next to me is a passive solar greenhouse, tropicals. It can stay warm in sub-zero temperatures without any inputs, without any heat or electricity, because of the way it's insulated and built. But then I've got a secondary greenhouse that I call my hothouse. It's got the kit. It's got heat in it. It's got double poly with a blower blowing air between the layers of poly. I can keep that fairly warm with a little bit of inputs, but not a lot. And then I've got a high tunnel, which is just a single skin poly, 16 by 36, that I can do all of my, season extension in on the crops. So I get, 2 zones warmer, plus to keep the rains and frosts off that crop. I'm building 2 more of those this year. One's going to be exclusively for firewood and firewood storage and drying wood. And then the other is just going to be another high tunnel greenhouse, so that basically in unpredictable weather, which is happening more and more these days with all the geoengineering that's happening, all the man-made climate change out there, I can basically get my garden going no matter what the weather's doing today.
Quick
So
question on
those
the
are huge
greenhouse.
starting points.
Yeah, quick question
Yeah.
on the greenhouse. Elliot Coleman said if for every layer of your greenhouse, you can move 200 miles south, climate-wise.
right.
Is that okay? So that's what you're finding too. So
Absolutely. Elliot
okay.
Coleman is a friend of
Uh,
mine, also been,
okay.
my big inspiration since
Yeah,
the
for me
beginning.
as well. Me as well. Okay,
Yeah,
I
so
don't know him
for sure.
personally. Okay, so definitely. So I'm good. If I'm in North Florida, we get hard freeze, but it's rare. We definitely
Yes.
get frost. I want to move my garden 24 or 200 miles south, so I only need like one layer, simple line.
Yeah, but greenhouses for you in Florida
Uh-huh.
are more than about frost. They're actually about keeping the rain off on the shoulder seasons and on the wet time of the year. So most market gardeners that I know in that region, I know a number of them.
In North Florida,
The
where
best
we
kind
are.
of North Florida, Central Florida,
Okay,
absolutely.
Central
The
Florida is
best way,
very different. We get fall leaves here, so it's very different
yeah,
climate.
but you still get rain that can really fuck you up.
Oh yeah, it'll
And so
happen all overnight.
yeah, absolutely. The best greenhouse in shape in North Florida environment
Mhm.
is straight walls for 6 feet and then bowing
Yeah.
at the top. And then basically during, 10 months of the year, the whole greenhouse is open on the side walls. That
Yeah.
top layer is just there to keep the unpredictable torrential rains that could come in and really damage your crop. That's what they're for. And
We
then
also kind of need
that's where
really, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
you put gutters on there or have some kind of French drains on the side. So when that rain comes in, it's just pouring off the side. That rain is being moved into a French drain system that gets that rain off to a lower part on your property.
Yeah, we really kind of need like 12 to 15 minute minimum heights here in Florida for a greenhouse. Although in summer it's just it'll fry everything. But there's
But then you
yeah.
put shade cloth on it, right? Then you put
Yeah,
30%
so
shade cloth on it.
for me, what I want to do is I want to have there's like this phase where I really want all light to come in, and I want to have that blackout on the top for the summer when the sun goes up there because I don't even need it, and then the front part of it a different material. So I kind of have a design. I'll send it sometime, but it's just so I don't need to keep changing things. It's just as light
Yeah,
as the light
exactly.
changes. Yeah.
Well, that's where a 20% shade
Yes,
cloth
exactly.
really goes a long way, because then and that's what they do in Mexico. Like you go down and see
Okay.
big farms in Mexico, that's what they're doing. So it's very common. Even Southern California, you see that stuff in the Central Valley. People do that all the time.
All right, so yeah, I don't have a greenhouse yet. I'm waiting. I want to grow year round. There are some crops I can grow year round, but that's the. All right, so then, all right, north you need the greenhouse. What after that? We could use it here too, but you really need it up where you are.
I'm in Minnesota, so I guess I need one.
Similar, yeah.
Definitely. Absolutely in Minnesota. Another thing I would say is 2 sources of water. Critical.
Okay. 2 sources.
So one source might be the utility water of a region, because you can be rural in northern Florida and still be connected to a centralized water district.
We are. That's exactly
Same
us.
even in Minnesota. Like I've been to tons of farms in those regions. So that's fine. Use that. but you should have your own well. I would highly advise people to get your own well. Either, in northern Florida, you'd probably be able to do a pit well because of the high water table in some of those areas. Even actually Minnesota has a pretty high water table, and Michigan,
Yeah.
same thing.
It's funny. I was just this week looking into getting a primary water well drilled.
Oh, primary water well, you'll be. I have a primary water well, and it's God's water, and it's
Yeah.
limitless, and it
Yeah,
comes.
it's a couple grand,
it's
but I'm thinking about doing it.
Oh, I mean, I paid
Right.
27 grand for mine, and I wouldn't hesitate to spend
Wow.
twice as much as that, because that's tapped into the fissures in the rock of the water that's completely independent from what goes on the surface.
Mhm.
So all the chemtrailing they're doing to poison the water and everything is independent. So
Yep.
that's great.
This is
But
water produced by the earth.
exactly, produced in the earth, and it's abundant. Another well you can do fairly easily in DIY is a pit well. And in like many parts of the United States where you have a high water table, because this is different. It's a pit well is still using surface water, because it's where water accumulates at low points, right? Because water always finds the lowest point. And so you can dig a pit well, 10 feet deep, put a culvert in there, covered up with some infrastructure, and then you'll just see that water table there. You can pump from that very simply. Put a sump pump down there, and you can draw water from that. But it is seasonally dependent. So if you get into a really dry time of the year, it'll be low or
Whereas
nothing.
primary water is the same all year round.
Primary water is independent from all surface water, hydraulic cycle, whatever you want to call it.
All right, question. We have a well. It's my neighbor's, but it's right on the fence by a garden. He lets me have access to it. But it's 300 feet deep through sand. So it's way down, and we're actually not far from the coast. So it's all sand all the way down. So the pump uses more electricity than it makes worthwhile. But with a generator in an emergency, it's there. It's just not useful for
Yes.
anything. Is there any way? Well, yeah, in this situation, any way around that, or that's just what it's emergency only? Drive somewhere else, buy a small property that has, because I could drive up the road and the water's 3 feet below the surface.
I'll tell you, man. I
Yeah.
mean, I'm very familiar with Florida.
Uh-huh.
I'm super familiar with every state as far as the US goes, because this is what I do most of the time is I'm on topographic maps analyzing properties for customers, clients all over the US. So I'm super familiar with the soil quality and the topography and the flora and fauna of all the states. The biggest problem in Florida is the sand.
Yeah.
Sandy. It's crazy. It's a weak link. Whereas even in Minnesota or even in Arizona, where John is, you can drill and tap into primary water fairly easily. But in Florida, not so much. I mean, as far as a real primary well, like I'm talking thousands of feet deep, you can get it anywhere. But that's expensive to drill. It's like prices up here right now are $57, $60 a foot to drill. So, I mean, geez, do the math on 1,000-foot well. It's a lot. And you need quite a bit of electricity to pump water up that. But my water is 300 something feet deep, my well, but it is through pure granite.
It's rock. Yeah, exactly.
And it's clean. It's hard, but that's not bad for drinking. It's just bad for your pipes. So you might have to soften it here and there, but that's the challenge in Florida. But then I would say
Maybe the rainwater would be an alternative.
You can
to this
harvest
thing.
Absolutely.
rainwater with
To set up a
bladder.
basic rainwater system is not complicated at all. And
You
and
get
and with
tons of
the
that.
amount of rain you get, for sure. Yeah. So there, on my property, I have what do I have? 3 sources of water. I've got my main primary well, which seems limitless, and I can just pump from year round. It goes directly into my house through a pitless adapter. So all winter I can pump from it, no problem. Then I have a pit well that collects the snow melt and all water that sheds into a riparian area where there's trees, and all the water just melts and moves to naturally. I've got a 10-foot deep pit well that's mostly seasonal. I can get from it, call it 6 to 8 months of the year. Then I've got rainwater catchment on all of my buildings, all moved to one location, and I'm putting about 10,000 liters of water storage there that's also connected to the house. So even if I was in a zero electricity situation where I couldn't even pump, I have a manual pump that I could pump from my rainwater and my pit well. So I'm even setting up so that because I've got a pretty sweet off-grid power system here. You know, we're 20 kilowatts of solar, 100 kilowatt hours of batteries. I got 600 liters of diesel with a diesel generator. I could withstand many, many years with no any energy inputs. But let's say an EMP for some freakish reason knocked everything out and I had no electricity. I could still heat my home, cook, and have heated water without any electricity up here. And I could have water because I can go down and pump a charge tank manually from my two other sources that aren't deep and have water. So that's where I try to think about everything down to the redundancy of no electricity.
You're
How do you survive?
That's
for
awesome.
real.
Hey, Curtis, I have a quick question. Through all your research and consulting, do you have like geographical areas within the U.S. that you would recommend if you want to go all out?
Yes.
That
Yes.
would be very interesting.
In fact,
to hear.
I'm actually doing a YouTube series right now. We just did the first one last week. The next one, I think Arkansas is coming up next. We're doing every single U.S. state and every single Canadian province of where the no-go zones and the go zones are. So we look at every state and we say, avoid these metropolitan areas for population risk, avoid these areas for water risks, and then look at these areas for the best places to be in that state. We're literally doing every single state.
Where would you say currently would be the mecca of doomsday? You can totally live off the grid within
So
the
if I were to
US?
pick states in the US,
Like the number one currently, would you say area?
I would actually say what we started in the beginning, northwestern Arkansas and southern Missouri. If I were to pick a geographical region of the US right now, that would be the place.
We took a vacation once there, and it was the most most boring vacation we ever had. But I just remember those hills going up and down and up and down. I mean, it was really
Yeah, you're talking about survival, resources, climate, population,
everything, factoring in all those things. I mean, another metric I use is the 11 scales of permanence. So I have a team, like we evaluate real estate all over the world, mostly the US because that's mostly where our clients are, but we evaluate real estate that's for sale right now, and we publish a list. It's called the Homestead Accelerator. We publish 10 to 30 listings a week that are in various states of the United States that have all the hallmarks of a homestead property that give you what you need. And we look at properties in Minnesota all the time too. There's less. Arizona's tough. New Mexico's tough. Utah's tough. Northern California is a bit of a gravy train, actually. If you want to find a cheap homestead property and you can duck out from the politics, you can actually find really good stuff in Northern California right now. But I would say my favorite regions for sure, northwestern Arkansas, southern Missouri, away from the Mississippi, right? Like you can't be in the Mississippi Valley. Forget that. But Kentucky's really good. I like Kentucky. I actually find good places in western Pennsylvania. Fairly good. Western New York, Western New York State's really good. Michigan's great, basically as far away from Detroit and Chicago as possible. But the North Mitten in Michigan's really good. Even the Eastern Quadrant, that's like zone 3, cold, but good spots there. Many good spots in Minnesota.
You're missing one that we always in America always talk about. Alabama. How's Alabama?
Well, Alabama's pretty good, actually.
Everyone
find some
talks
good
about
places
it here,
in Alabama. I find good places. Again, it's away from the population centers. You can find good spots in Alabama for sure. Even where else? I mean, I generally just avoid Georgia. I generally avoid...
I actually, when I go up down Ohio, I go to Alabama and go north just to avoid the entire state of Georgia.
Well, just drive through Georgia and you see it. Like, look at the average Walmart shopper.
I can't take it.
In Georgia. It's rough.
Stage 0.
Yeah. And same with Florida too, though. Sorry for you, Jeff, but Miami, like anywhere near Miami, like the amount of people in that region is startling. And so I would
Miami, you're talking about Miami is like another country away. It really takes like 18 hours to get there or something.
Yeah. You don't want to be in a place where there's lots of stage 0 people.
Exactly.
Well, here's the biggest issue.
Welfare dependence, like Chicago, Atlanta, Memphis, like it's brutal, man.
Well, here's the thing. Here's what I found. So I used to travel a lot in Europe, kind of like you travel in the United States, and the villages and places in the towns are you get that everywhere. So everywhere you go in the country, we do have an epidemic of it in the United States. I think a lot of it has to do with the crap food. If you eat crap food,
The morbid
you're going to
obesity.
absorb. Well, yeah, you absorb toxins. Your body doesn't know what to do, so it just stores it in fat and just keep producing it. And who knows what that's doing to the brain because the brain also stores toxins.
Yeah,
So there's a
but
lot
even
of
to Greg's point earlier,
mhm,
to the zones, the stage zeros, is that
yeah.
almost, what is it? Are we near 100 years of the New Deal in the United States? So
in
we're
there.
near 100 years of a welfare dependent, where now you go to a city like Atlanta, um, Chicago, Memphis, there's literally 3 generations of welfare dependency. Think about that. There's 3 generations of people that don't know anything except food stamps and welfare programs. So like, how are they gonna, that unfortunately they'll be the first ones dead. I mean, like, if you think about, and I don't say fortunately, I don't want anybody to die, but if you think about a shit it's the fan scenario, those are the people that are going to get violent the fastest, but they'll also die the fastest because they're stupid and uneducated. And you go up against, like, say, hardcore Gadsden flag, Arkansas, Texas people, forget about it. They're armed, educated, trained, forget about it. But there'll be this wave of violence, which I would just rather avoid. And I think most Americans that are those hardcores, Gadsden flag type folks, they're going to survive just fine. And they don't mind a few gunfights because they've probably been in a few. Whereas me, I just rather just duck out for the whole thing. Like, I just rather wait for the dust to settle,
Same.
and then we'll see.
To give you a little scenario of what it's like in my town. So when my wife and I, we've had guests over the first time we came here. So we're from Ohio, as I said. So we sit down at a table and they're like, "Oh, so everyone here?" My wife's like, "Everyone here around here has guns," and they lean forward. Yes. Like, what are you gonna do about it? And she's like, "Oh no, it's cool." And then I'm at church, and then I hear somebody who is a little bit nutty in the church is packing. And I'm talking with people, and everyone opens their coat. We all packing, so in church. So
And that's
this
the
is
same
the way
thing
it
with
is down here.
Arizona.
You don't want to
I
have
get
a
a
church
sense-
that doesn't have people with
Every
guns in
I
it.
get a
single
sense of,
person,
Especially these
every
days,
other
right?
person, yeah, every other person, it's like that. It's just that's their norm, and so they're constantly thinking about it. So yeah, so the average Gadsden flag person isn't going to mind a fight. They've been planning for it. So
And
They've
when
been
I
planning
see
for it
like
for
a
a
lot
very
of
long
people in
time.
Arizona
Exactly.
pack, I get a sense of comfort. A lot of people
I do
are
too,
like,
man.
yes,
they're
I like
like,
these
"Oh
people.
my
Yeah.
goodness, this is horrible." I'm like, that's because you're psychotic and you would probably you're suicidal, maybe homicidal,
You don't
and
want
you
to go
shouldn't
anywhere
have a
near you.
gun
Yes,
if
exactly.
you have that
Exactly.
visceral effect on
Yeah.
that.
Oh
It's
yeah.
the gun is a
I'll tell
tool.
you too, man. Canadians have guns. Like,
Yeah.
lots of Canadians have guns.
I'm
It's just
sure.
it's just not part of the culture up here. But people are packing. Not open carry like in Missouri, but people are packing, and people who have land have guns. Like, so Canada's very armed. So yes, but again, you have to differentiate the real politics of where people are, and Canada in the mainstream is only represented in Southern Ontario and Quebec, where everybody lives. But the rest of Canada is good old farm boys. Like, and it all just comes down to metropolitan areas. Same values that people in America have, same values that people in Minnesota and northern Michigan have. We're all the same type of people, actually, because we're all kind of like, you know, European descent that have that work ethic of, hey, there's going to be a winter, and so you better prepare. And so I think as we go into this sort of new world order of what's coming down the pipe, it's you apply that mentality in the micro of the seasons to the macro of the season that we're going into, which is this season of scarcity. And that's we're already there. Like, it's just they haven't throttled it as much as they can.
So I do want to talk about some scenarios, in your opinion, that may come to actually set the shit hitting the fan in motion. But before we do that, I did want to wrap up really quick the preparing a garden. You got preparing a well, the water or second water source, and then Why am I missing step one?
Well, we got soil
We
here.
talked about a
Soil.
greenhouse.
So
and then two
I want to get
sources
into
of
soil.
water, and
Greenhouse.
then we
There,
did-
there we go. The soil.
Yeah, we
That's
need to get
kind of
into
the big
soil.
thing. Yeah, I knew in
Here's-
Florida I
here's the
can't grow in
thing
sand, so wood chips are
This is
going
where
down.
this is a thing that people in the homesteading context miss all the time.
Okay.
Before you build your garden, build a fence.
Okay.
Mm.
Get your fencing infrastructure in.
Okay, mine's in.
Because all it takes is some deer to mow through there,
Yep,
and it's
exactly.
over.
Armadillos, they'll dig up your whole
Or
crop
whatever
down
the,
here.
the,
Yep.
the
We don't have
mammal
armadillos in
that you
Minnesota.
have, right?
And then we can talk
Get your
about these criminals here too in a little
Well,
bit.
that's a
real
whole
quick.
other
All
conversation.
right. Yeah,
and
well,
that-
let's
that
deal with the
takes-
soil. Yeah.
Yeah, but get your fence infrastructure happening. Start with movable fences and electric fences if that makes sense first, because sometimes it's good. Like boundary fencing, you talk to a guy like Joel Salatin, who's also a friend of mine. You talk about when you get into grazing and stuff like that, you want to get the boundary fencing sorted first, then you go inside and then get that the fencing inside the homestead sorted out. But you can start with movable fencing to kind of figure out where you want to be.
Yeah. What's the
'Cause
cheapest? What's the price on this for the cheapest fencing just to get
Oh,
something
you can get for us it's a 300-foot electric fencing kit for $600. And
All
then
right,
you
that's
can
good.
expand on it for 100 at a time, because you don't necessarily have to have the same charger thing. You can just have one of those and it can supply, thousands of feet in fence. But start with something like that if you want to kind of figure out where it makes sense to have the garden. Because what a lot of people don't think about when they're laying out the homestead is, where's your chore path? Because the infrastructure is not there, so you don't know where the chore path is. But you think, so when I get out of the home and I got to go feed the chickens and I'm going to turn on the water, turn on some irrigation here, I'm going to go gather some veggies or do some cultivating tasks or whatever it is. What's that path? Then design your homestead around that path so that it's efficient. So when I go out of my front door of my home to do my chores, I got 1, 2, 3, 4 chores, and then I come back and I'm done. So design it around that, get the fencing infrastructure around that, then really start building out those garden beds, because there's nothing worse than preparing a big garden and then some mammal pest came in and destroyed it. That's demoralizing, and deer can be the worst for us in those types of climates, but there's other types of mammal pests in warmer climates too that you'll experience.
Yeah, our bears climb over my fence and destroy it because electric fences don't work for bears here. We found the neighbors.
Mine does, but
Unless
okay, a dog and a fence is your best friend.
Okay, a dog, yes, definitely.
Our bear pressure here
You
is
have grizzlies
unbelievable.
up there, right?
Oh, we get everything, man.
Those
I mean,
things scare the heck out of me.
we see a lot of
natural
grizzlies. Like a
phobia.
grizzly bear occupies a multi-hundred mile area, so you're not going to see a grizzly bear. But I get black bears on a daily basis.
The male Florida black bear is as big as a grizzly, 800 pounds.
Wow.
Yeah.
So
we
I
have them in
found
there,
that a
yeah.
good shepherding dog, like my
Okay,
dog,
shepherd.
I got this great dog.
I like them.
She's a combination of a healer, Aussie Shepherd, and Bernese. She's like a perfect combination of a shepherding dog. She likes to stay busy. She wants to do her chore routine every day. I have a 8-foot tall fence with 2 electric wires, one that's a foot off the ground, and then one's a foot from the top, and they protrude out from the fence. So it's really difficult to climb. And actually don't even use the electrical part anymore, because I found that I don't need it. It's the dog and the good fence that if anything makes a noise on that fence, my dog is going at it.
Mhm.
And with the cougar, which we have to deal with as well, they want a victim, right? They don't want to fight. They want a victim.
Right.
It's like the government. They want a victim, not a. They want to bully somebody. They want a victim, not a fight. So they, with the dog and the fence, it's a perfect combination. The first year I moved here, before this fence was done, I spent $40,000 on my fence, by the way. Before this fence was done, I had 20 bear experiences. 20.
Oh,
Yeah. And so once the fence was once the fence was done and then I had the dog, 0. I haven't had a single bear experience here in the last 3 years.
yeah, they're opportunists. They're not going to mess with it.
It's not worth the effort, because they got to climb this thing. It's not that easy. And the dog is on the other side barking at them. They're just going, it's just.
Yeah, they don't want that. They
Yeah,
won't take
they
their
don't want
kids
bother.
there either. Mhm.
Yeah.
All right, so when you got the fence up, and there's many different ways you can do that. When you get the fence up, would you say soil?
Yeah. Then start getting your gardens formed, and that's going to be a process that varies. Probably out of the four of us here, Greg probably has the best start on soil just based on
Yeah.
his climate and his
It's
region.
natural.
Minnesota has got beautiful black loam soil.
Beyond that, I haven't done anything, just to be clear.
Well, but that's okay.
Got
But
everything we
you're going to
need.
have it's going to be easiest for
Yeah.
you.
Me, I had to
Whereas
prepare for a year and a
myself
half
in
to
the
get my
mountains,
soil.
I got to get the soil from
I see.
areas that harvest it, like water draws, and bring it. So I've had to do that. Jeff's going to have to build the soil in because he's sitting on 60 feet of sand, and then John just doesn't have any because it's Arizona. So
Right.
he's going to have to bring that in, and so everybody's going to have their own sort of unique recipe of how to get and build soil in that area. But that would be the thing, is like, get the soil built up in the area, because good soil will also reduce your pest impact. Good balanced soil where you've got natural equilibrium, diversity within the biology of the soil is definitely going to make your pest problems less and less. I've seen that here, because my first year of my soil was brutal. There's so many aphids, so many pests. Now I'm getting into a balance. I've actually started to incorporate biochar into my soil, we've done some electroculture as well, but now I'm finding a little bit more balance and a lot less pest problems. And so it'll be the same for most people.
All right, how deep do you need the soil? I mean, I can grow in 4 inches, but I find 12 or more is a lot better.
I agree with that. I think, you're going to add over time. It's kind of
Yeah.
hard to start with, just if you're building on
It's too
nothing,
expensive.
hard to start with 12 inches of soil.
Yeah.
So you start with 4, start growing some low feeding crops, basic root veggies, greens, herbs. Once you start getting into the squashes and the melons and the corn and the tomatoes, those are heavy feeders. You need a deeper soil profile.
Yeah.
So, again, start with some things, get some wins, right? Build the system up, bring more in. I'm trying to add 2 inches to my topsoil every year. And I'm almost done. I think I'll do one more year where I'm bringing in new compost, good finished compost, and adding 2 to 4 inches each year. I think next year will be the last that I'll need to do of that. And then I've got a good base that I can work with. And then my own practices are just going to keep that in balance.
So
Gentlemen,
after soil, what's the next step?
Well,
start learning to grow.
yeah, then you start. Well, then
Don't do it.
I like to start with annuals, and then I move to perennials. Some people like to start with perennials, but the problem, and it always depends on the context of the land. And that's why, like, when I consult for people, I get their land up on Google Earth, and what's there. Let's first do a full spectrum analysis of what's there, and then go from there. But I like to start with annuals, because then annuals you can just turn and burn. You get some stuff going, get some food growing, start eating some stuff.
And
then
there'll
start
be
thinking about
lettuce, cucumbers.
yeah, lettuce and herbs and radishes and beets and carrots and stuff like that. Then start thinking about animals, where animals want to fit into that system, and then start thinking about trees. The easiest animal to introduce are egg layers, chickens that lay, and then you can start thinking about meat birds. Then you can move up to bigger livestock if your land will allow that. Then you can start thinking about trees. Where do you want to put your trees in? What's your 3, 5, 10-year plan with trees? I just planted 450 trees. I got this quarter acre.
Saw that on
forest.
Twitter. I saw your pictures.
Holy
They're
cow.
cool.
I just
Yeah.
planted 60 trees in my yard. I thought that was
Okay.
a lot.
Well, I planted really probably around 50 to 60 productive trees. Most of the trees that I planted, 3/4 of the trees that I planted in my food forest will be gone in 10 years. Half of them will be gone in 2 years. The next 25% will be gone in 5 years. And then the last 12% will be gone in the last 10 years. So all the trees it's called a syntropic food forest. And it's a system that uses there's a tree every foot in row, every single foot. And the trees are
Like an orchard.
yes, it's an orchard, but
a lot more
the
dense.
main production trees are 18 feet apart, or 9 and 18 feet apart. And then there's fruiting shrubs in there as well. But then the rest, every foot is a productive, is not a productive, it's a biomass or nitrogen accumulating tree that only is there for a time to support the main system. And it's chopped and dropped twice a year to add biomass and humus to the soil. And I'm going to flail mow it to even expedite it. And then
What does that even mean? What's
Yeah, there's so
flail
many
mow?
things that are new for me. Go ahead.
Flail mowing is a masticating mower that has tines that spin on a horizontal axis that spin vertically to just shred up stuff. So I basically I go in with a pruner and I just chop down the biomass trees. So for my main biomass trees are the two ones I have the most of are Carigana and mountain alder. They're nitrogen fixing biomass accumulating trees that I just go and just hack them down because they want to grow like weeds. And then I have willows and elms and poplars and honey locusts as well. But I go and hack this stuff down, throw it on the ground, take my flail mower, drive over it, and just mash it down into wood chips, basically. So I'm building this mass of amount on my forest that is grown there instead of me importing it, which helps actually because in nature things move better when they're slower. So it's better, in my opinion, it's better to get wood chips that were grown on site than to import wood chips. Nothing wrong with importing wood chips. Don't get me wrong. You could do it too. But I like the idea of a slow accumulation of these things so the system adapts to what's there. And so that's kind of the idea there, is that I'm just like managing this system. Twice a year, I go in and prune everything down, massacre it down to the ground, and then the system's just going to improve and grow and improve.
So your main motivation in planting trees is to get wood chips from them, or
nitrogen fixing and biomass accumulation.
All right. So now for somebody,
that's what you're looking. Anything else you're looking for specifically in trees? I'm sorry, Jeff.
That aren't fruit bearing. No.
What other reason would you want to? That's the main reason why you plant trees.
Biomass accumulation and nitrogen fixing. Yes.
Okay.
That's it.
All right. So now if I have, so we have, like I said, 70% of our county is forest, and we have every year the electric company comes through and trims all the trees. I grab all their wood chips. They're from my yard and my street.
That's good.
I don't need to do anything with the trees. I have zero need for it because it's in one of these streets that the tree trimmers are coming through once a year. So I have an endless supply of,
and it's hardwood, which is good. So
really quick, it is hardwood, but here the decomposers are out of control, as you may know, in Florida. In 6 months, that is soil. They will just break down those chips to nothing.
And that's the advantage to your climate over mine, is in a temperate climate.
Yeah.
But the biomass accumulation is tenfold. I'm in a boreal climate where we get, all my precipitation is in winter. It's in snow. And so my growing season right now is bone dry. But all the trees around me are softwoods, which aren't great for mulch. They're terrible for mulch. And so so again, it comes down to context and what's available to you.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
Can I change the subject real quick and tell you a story?
Sure.
Well, first of all, my grandfather was a very successful guy. He started the Johnson fishing reel in Mankato, Minnesota years ago. So my grandmother, he died before I was born, but my grandmother was very wealthy, and just for whatever that's worth. And we asked her, what time in your life was the most enjoyable? When did you have the most fun? And she said, when we first got married, we lived on a little farm, and we had nothing, and there was no running water, there was no electricity, there was nothing. It was absolutely living off the land completely. And she said that was the most enjoyable time of my life. And I thought, wow, that compared to all the money you had later in life, this was what you liked the best. So
well, I love those
you want to speak to that.
Well, I do, because I think what you bring up is actually the glue that holds it all together. And that if your heart isn't in it and you don't, because there's a lot of people that would listen to that and say, well, that's crazy, because the average Walmart shopper would just be like, I can't understand that. I couldn't live without Doritos and nighttime television. And so they couldn't get their head around that. But I think all of us probably could. And then it speaks to the greater issue of that prepping and getting on the land isn't about being motivated by a sense of fear. It's motivated by a sense of love for and passion for the work. I love doing my chores. I love being out in the garden with my children. And I know that that's going to impart on them that when they're adults, they're going to say that was such a great time of their life, because everybody I know who grew up with that says the same thing. So yes. And that's where you got to have your heart in it. And if you don't understand the work and know the work, then you won't know what it's like. But I 100% agree. And that's got to be the thing that brings it together, is the joy out of it. Is so, yeah, we're preparing for the apocalypse, as I like to call them, but we're having a really good time doing it and enjoying every step of the way.
What is this? What is your organization's size? Are the Freedom Farmers in that? You were talking about your team in that, and you said we. I'm just trying to get a picture of this because after COVID started, I kind of everything changed. You know, your direction changed, and I haven't followed as much. What's the size? What do you got going on, and who is your team, and what is your organization for those not?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I kind of have two things that I do now. The main thing is Freedom Farmers. We have about 10 people on that team, and Freedom Farmers is a platform that wants to educate and connect people to the best forms of agrarian life, if you will, on the business side and the homestead side. So our platform has over 20 courses that go through every type of enterprise within regenerative and sustainable small scale farming. And most of those courses aren't even done by me. 3 of them are done by me. And so we produce courses, and then we have a whole social platform that connects people who have these same values and are looking to do the same thing. And then within Freedom Farmers, we have a program called the Homestead Accelerator, which we have 2 full-time people dedicated to running, and then myself as well. So I kind of come in and do the final touches on it. But we basically search the internet and find active homestead listings that meet our criteria of food, water, energy, shelter. And we mostly look at rural areas, but we look at all the states and all the provinces. And sometimes we do Europe and Australia and New Zealand as well. And sometimes we even do other countries like South Africa and stuff, but not as often. Most of our clients are in the United States. And so that's Freedom Farmers. That's what Freedom Farmers does. It's courses, it's a social network, and we want to help you get on the land and teach you everything to do once you get there. And then more on the private side, I've been a consultant for people privately. My consultancy is called Freedom, Liberty, Prosperity Consultants, and so that's kind of where I'm working now with individuals. I find most of my clients come from the Freedom Farmers Network because maybe we help them find a property, and they have this, and then and they want to come to me for next steps on their property, or how do they navigate annoying bureaucracy that's coming at them. And so we look at, I've been in the private, I've been studying the law for 10 years. I've been writing paperwork. I've been helping people find freedom in terms of taxes and nonsense that the government has throwing at you. I kind of help people navigate that, the matrix, if you will, and get them set up as free as they possibly can within the confines of the law. And I use the law, and I actually find most of the remedies within the law. It's all there. They just don't want you to know it. So that's kind of how I exist today. Is Freedom Farmers is on the public side, and then FLP Consultants is kind of on the private side of things.
Okay, all right. So this is neat. Now you had mentioned on the and I don't know if you want to go into this, and that's okay if you don't. You have a certain distaste to software. There's a couple experiences. You've had a number of projects involving software, and I think the Freedom Farmers social media platform is probably the closest you've gotten to. Is that one of the ones that you included, or is that one that you could consider something separate entirely? You've had a few software projects start.
Yeah, I wouldn't even call that a software project because it's mostly web-based.
Right.
The software projects I've been involved in have been crop planning, market gardening type softwares and things like that we talked about prior.
Yeah. In that conversation, you mentioned 3 times to me, farmers are not stupid. Farmers are not stupid. I'm like, I never said farmers are stupid. So I'm wondering if the other software developers were kind of giving you this impression that or they create the software that the farmers are stupid, or what was that coming from?
No, it's just that it's really nuanced. I'm even finding this with some of the software that I'm using right now for my farm planning, is that when it comes down to it, I got to change things on the fly. And I find that I always revert to just no farm plan at all. But that's because I've been doing this for 15 years. Like I've been farming and homesteading and growing my own food for 15 years. And so I find now I'm at a state where, and this has been this way for a long time. I have rarely ever used farm plans, to be honest. I mean, I always start with a framework. But I think within 4 years of maybe 4 or 5 years of my market gardening career, I was just doing it on the fly because I found that my intuition served me far better than any software could. So, and if you talk to farmers that have been doing it for a long time, it's the same thing. However, market gardens are very complicated. And so
Yes, fast
where you have
moving.
50 different types of crops, that type of situation, and you might have 50 different crops and 6 different types of markets, saying like restaurants, CSAs, farmers markets, other direct consumer things, and, maybe a couple odds and ends. And then you might have hundreds of customers. That's where a real crop plan is valuable, and necessary. But for my homestead context, or even when I was running a small market garden with like 20 different crops, few hundred customers, one farmer's market a week, and mostly restaurant and retail clients, I didn't even need to have a farm plan. I was able to wing it because the farm was simple enough that my intuition served me better than any software could. I find that I would always just spend wasting time. Oh, I got to move this around here, and I was like, why do I even need? Like I just did that with my farm. I mean, it completely changed my market garden based on what I had planned. And do I care to go back in the software and update it?
But in
I
fairness, you are one of the experts. You've written books out there on how to
But I'm not,
optimize and
Jeff.
make. So the
I'm not.
average person would go. I mean, I'll be honest. The reason I signed up for Freedom Farmers in the first place is to get your spreadsheets. I wanted to see the plan. So I
Yes.
don't have the experience, and I would say I do now, but originally that's what I'm looking for is the plan.
I
How
would
do you
I
make
would
this
tell you though,
efficient?
Jeff,
Yeah.
to not throw myself under the bus, but as far as farmers are concerned, most career farmers are better at it than I am. They just might not be as good as communicating it as I am, because that's been my skill set as I've been public since 2014. So I'm not the greatest farmer, but I'm good
I
at.
appreciate your humility, but let's back up. Okay. So there is a reason why you have connected with the best farmers in the world because the
Yes.
content, the information that you put out there, there's I mean, some of it you took from Elliot Coleman, some of it you took from other places, but you really honed in on optimization. You found a way to take. I never heard of anyone in a quarter of acre saying, yes, I can make $100,000 on a quarter acre property of somebody else's.
Right.
And you really kind of like that's what opened people's eyes. I don't know what what made your YouTube channel go up, but that's what I came
It was
across.
that.
Mhm.
Yeah, it was that. Then when I started talking about the New World Order, they just dialed me right down. But yeah, when I was doing, because
They
I
do
couldn't
that
keep
to
my mouth shut
everybody.
during COVID. I couldn't keep my mouth shut.
Yes.
If I wanted to just be a YouTuber and make millions of dollars on YouTube, I would have just kept my mouth shut and just would have kept cranking out gardening content, and I'd be like any of those other guys that are in that niche. But I couldn't keep my mouth shut. And
So
I've had a diversity of incomes for so many years too that I was just like, I'd rather just be honest and call things as they are. And I get bored of things too. Like frankly,
That's the
I've
musician in
been,
you.
it's the
This
musician
is
in
the
me.
same thing for me.
It is.
Dragging
You
it
have the
in.
same thing.
Yeah.
I just got bored of making gardening videos. Like I just felt like, what else is there to say?
There is a lot of work in gardening videos. I started a garden video channel and
You
I was
know?
like, holy crap, this takes a lot of work. You got to edit it. You got
Well, it does,
and
especially when
plus,
you
how do
need
you
to get the
garden with
work
one
done.
hand and you got the camera here and you got.
That's the thing. But
I
I
know,
find
I know.
for me, I just want to get my homestead done. And so making videos, and I documented pretty much the last 3 years on here. But this last stretch of it, I'm just over it. I'm not saying I'm not going to make videos on my homestead. I am, but not in the way that I did, where I'm like setting up a tripod and I'm showing every single step. I'm like,
yeah,
that slows me down. I just want to get it done.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
so that's where I'm at these days, because I see the urgency in it
I
more so
just
than the value of the content.
I just did a little math, and my brother-in-laws have well, my wife grew up on a farm in Iowa. It's 1,200 acres, and they own that farm today. So if you can get 100,000 a year off of a quarter acre, you could get 500 million a year
It
out of
doesn't, it
1,200
doesn't, it
acres.
doesn't scale
Doesn't
that way
quite
though,
You
Grant.
know,
doesn't quite
yeah.
work that way. It's
No, it
like
doesn't
I don't
scale
think
that
they're
way.
making that much.
No. That scaling stops at 2 acres,
Okay, but
maybe
still,
5.
that's a million a year almost
You,
at
you
two
you
acres.
can do. I mean, I got a buddy down in Mesa, close to John. I would encourage him to check it out. It's called
Oh, nice.
Steadfast Farm. 1 acre farm. They do $1 million a year.
Wow, that's
1 acre,
amazing. Wow.
right? But can you scale that 5x? Not
Well, so now
really.
This brings up the question I have, and since we first started hearing from you, I've been wondering, and maybe this is a question you've never been asked, but I'm in touch with a lot of people who have ministries, and I'm looking at helping to establish a tiny homes village in Minnesota. And what that means, we're looking at like purchasing 100 acres. We want to be able to put these, we're going to take people off the streets, but they can't just come in right directly off the streets. They have to qualify and all that kind of stuff. But these are people that are stage 0 people, and
Yes.
we're going to try to teach them as much as possible how to live off the land, how to do all the things you're talking about. And we want this
Yeah.
village to become self-sustaining so it can actually be empowering to these people. There's a place in Austin, Texas, it's so nice that people want to live there because they've taken people off the streets, and it's just a
Yeah.
beautiful place. And that's what I envision that this could become, something that people would say, wow, that's not only is it good for them, it's good for me,
And the working
Well,
on land could
I'll
be
tell you,
therapeutic.
I'll
when you
tell
when
you,
you
Greg.
said properties available in Minnesota, I got very excited about that.
Well, okay, so I don't want to burst your bubble. Okay. I really admire your desire to help people that way, but I've not kidding you. I've consulted on maybe about a dozen of projects just like that.
Okay,
Guess how many succeeded?
none.
0.
And
So-
why is that?
Because you have a vision of, okay, so and I've been involved in so many advocacy groups like that because of my work in urban agriculture, because that's where a lot of it really came from. I became pretty good friends with Michael Abelman in Vancouver, who started the downtown east side urban farm there called Soul Food Farm, helping people get off the street and whatnot. You have a idea when you imagine what this program looks like, you're seeing it from your eyes and your perspective.
Sure.
And it looks really good because you're going, okay, with this, the ministry is going to be involved. We're going to help people, and we're going to really
Right.
bring them
There
back.
are models, by the way, that
There
have
are models.
succeeded.
There's a lot of models, and they don't all fail. I just
Right.
the ones
No,
I've
the ones
never
I know
been
are
involved in a
have been
project
very
that,
successful. So
yeah, well, that's good because there's models. But when you envision what people look like, and it really comes down to how you bring those people in, and that probably could be the biggest thing where people fail
Sure.
on, probably. But it will come down to the individuals involved. And I find at this stage of the game, because so many people are so dependent for so long, that it's just not there. The most successful ones are the veteran ones
right,
that bring in military vets.
right.
Those are
The
ones
one
that
I'm thinking of is called Community First Village in Austin. But yes, there are lots of ones for vets as well.
Yep. Yeah, I would say definitely the ones that are going to be the most successful are with the least amount of inner city people.
Yeah.
Because poverty exists everywhere, right? And so
Sure.
but more poverty and more dependency exists where there's government infrastructure, because as I said prior, there's a direct correlation between the amount of concrete and the amount of government and the state. So the further people are from that, I think you're going to find a better quality of person. So I would say there, like, to set up an urban farm, and I've been invited, trust me, because I'm the guy. Like,
believe it.
my urban farming book is still the #1 book on urban farming. But I've been invited to be involved in inner city urban farming advocacy places, projects like that. Chicago, Detroit, Boston, you name it, all these kinds of shithole cities. They never last long because the people in the inner city are so dependent, and they're just it's so hard to change their mindset and their work ethic. Whereas if you're starting with something like a veteran that understand basic training and things like that, you're going to find a way better quality of individual, especially individuals who come from a faith-based community. I'd
Right.
say come
Well,
in.
that was definitely my intention
Yes.
to do that.
So I would say
one in Austin is faith-based.
I pray that works. And I think if you're starting from a place that's faith-based and or, military vets, yes, way better chance of success.
And Greg, you remember we were talking with Otto, he was setting up those futsal courts in the inner city. He says if they were an immigrant, who came across and, worked hard to get here, those facilities worked. If they put him in the facilities where the zero dependents were there, they tore it up. In a year, it was destroyed. So it was kind of,
It's just
so
such a shame, just the
careful.
government intention is to make them dependent.
Does seem that
Well,
way.
it's farming.
It
I mean,
It's
as a
vicious.
farmer, I've understood this for years. And actually, conversation I had with Joel Salatin at Mother Earth News years ago, we talked exactly about this, is that government is a farm. And if you're farming, you're not, what's a better livestock, wolves or sheep?
Yeah, we used to call it a plantation might be better than a farm.
Yeah, it is the government plantation.
Modern
I
day
mean,
plantation.
this is the Democrat plantation of Americanized leftist politics.
Yeah.
Is the Democrat plantation of just importing dependent voters that will always vote for you and give consent to bring tyranny because they'd rather have free stuff. So,
Exactly.
privileges and benefits versus, God-given right. People will take privileges and benefits because they prefer free stuff.
Right. That brings up a really interesting question, something that I've been struggling with for a long time. In Minnesota, we have obviously Republicans and Democrats. The Democrat Party, I am not kidding, call themselves the DFL. They still call themselves that. And F stands for farmer and L stands for labor. And what's interesting is until 2016, the districts which are the outside, the larger districts, not outside the metro area, were blue. They were Democrat districts. They were still farmers who were voting blue. And that's completely flipped over since 2016. It was kind of growing even before that,
The entire
but now it's just
party
totally red.
switched.
And the suburbs used to be red and now they're blue. It's just, it is so interesting. I don't know if you're kind of speaking to that, but it seems to be more true in Minnesota than anywhere else. And I don't understand why Minnesota is different. The mentality is here, but I just wonder if you can speak to the mentality of farmers. Why would they ever have been Democrats in the first place?
Because, well, it's a historical, it just comes down to the historical progression of agriculture and Western culture, is that after the post-Green Revolution in the United States, the USDA came out of that and formed a massive enterprise which created economic incentives for farmers to commodify the farm. And the commodification of the farm was a gravy train for a period of time, but it was just like any drug addiction, where the drug dealer starts with the free stuff and makes it cheap and available to get you addicted. Then they turn up the dial. So what happened was, call it a generation of dependency on farms where it mostly seemed that there was upside. But then the commodification of the farmer and the farm turned that when the inflationary fiat money scam that we're under started to create less yields as far as returns for farmers flipped. Now they're going, well, now I want independence. Problem is, now you're locked into this jurisdictional prison cell where you're locked in. And the likelihood of you think about, the breadbasket of the US, you think about Iowa, Nebraska, parts of Minnesota, where it's like GMO corn for as far as the eye can see in the US, the chances of those farmers to uncompartmentalize themselves back into traditional family farms, forget about it. It's like a meth addict trying to get out of that addiction years down the road when you've hit rock bottom. It's like, it's possible, but it's very difficult. So that's what I would say it comes down to, is like the politics of the day really only matter on how that they matter to you as the individual using those government services. And I think that's why I don't really care about the politics of the day, whether it's Trump or whoever else is going to be his running mate. I don't think it matters. Trump's not going to be able to change anything. It's because it's the people are so dependent that's the problem. The politics has now become the culture.
Oh, yeah, the
people.
farmers were.
Yeah. So can you unpack that a little bit? You said the commoditization of farming, and I just want you to unpack that a little further, if you don't mind.
The commodification of the farm and the farming, and so the farmer. So what we had pre-Green Revolution, and I wrote about this in my book, is kind of the opening chapter where I talk about, how we have to uncompartmentalize the farm. And the Green Revolution, before Green Revolution, we had your average family farm in Minnesota, Iowa, Nebraska, all those states in that region, Michigan. Your family farm was a multifaceted farm that had all the ins and outs there. The animals were part of the
sovereign.
vegetables, right? We had the waste systems were part of the fertility systems. We had a complete closed loop farm. The family worked on the farm. There was little to no government intervention in the farm whatsoever. Farmers were independent. This is where the whole Thomas Jefferson thing came up and said, unless you have 25% of your population farming, you cannot have a democracy, because people become dependent on the system. Therefore, they're only going to vote for more dependency and more privileges and benefits.
Where we are today.
So the Green Revolution compartmentalized the farm because they said, hey, instead of growing 100 different crops and having 20 different products from animals and grains and vegetables, grow one crop because it'll be so easy for you, and we'll give you grants to help you do that. So they got everybody growing corn, cotton, soy, and canola, really, and sugar beets and stuff like that down in Florida, sugar canes, whatever. And then now the farm, because you're only growing one crop, well, now you've dismembered the
Dependent on everything
family
else.
because there's no need. So dad can do it all on a tractor, right? So the kids don't need to be involved. The wife doesn't need to be involved. Most commodity farms in the Midwest don't even have gardens. Most commodity farmers in Nebraska and Iowa don't even grow their own vegetables or produce their own eggs. Like, whereas 100 years ago they did.
Yeah.
So the farm's been compartmentalized. That's put the farmer into a position of vulnerability where now the state has agency over everything. And so what you can argue about what that means in terms of the laws, specifically to the statutes, but what it fundamentally means is that it comes down to a saying that I have, is where the money flows, the policy goes. So now the USDA has created this big pyramid scheme where now you're at the bottom, the channel of money comes through you, yet now you're completely controlled by the policy. So where the money flows, the policy goes. So until you get unraveled from that state of dependency, starting with the money, forget about it.
So are you saying to this day, farmers are still receiving money from government agencies?
The USDA
It's run. Everyone is.
Okay.
The
Yeah.
US,
What do I know?
people
No,
make
it's
fun
okay.
of
It
Canada
is.
for being a socialist country.
Mhm.
And as a farmer consulting to mostly American clients over the last 10 years, I can tell you the Canadian so-called socialist system pales in comparison to what the USDA puts out to farmers. It is unbelievable. The amount of loans and grants and free money that there is in the United States for farmers is, it doesn't exist in any other part of the
You
world.
aren't kidding, Curtis. It is stuff that I've looked into and I've had those meetings.
100%.
It's disgusting.
It's
In those little urban offices where the people are coming in, they are shaking in their boots when they go to present their yield at the end of the year to the government officials. I sat there and watched it, and it makes me sick. The whole farming, I said, I can't be part of that. This is not right.
Farmers are at the shackles of the USDA and the FDA and all of the other low-level regulatory agencies that regulate the health and safety stuff, more on the municipal and county level. The United States is the biggest socialist country in the world. Period. Full stop. All these Americans who think they make fun of me. Oh, Justin Trudeau, you guys live in. It's like, dude, do you know anything? Like, I actually know the policies in the United States because I've worked in it for so long that the U.S. doesn't. It pales. It destroys every other place. And so this is the part of the risk, is that the farmers. Not only are we talking about your average Walmart shopper like in Atlanta, Georgia, or Chicago or Detroit, but you're also talking about your average farmer in the Midwest actually looks physically a lot like your average Walmart shopper in Detroit and Chicago. They just might be white, but they're overweight. They sit on a tractor all day. They actually have very little skills on the farm anymore. It's quite scary because the food system, and same thing in Central Valley. In California, which produces like 80% of the vegetables in the United States. So you drive through Central Valley, the farms are completely compartmentalized to an industrial commercial procedure that has nothing to do with living on the land. It's just industrial. It's mining and industrialization.